Hey everyone. So, a lot of shit's been going on, and I'll make sure the editor edits out the swear word. But we have a lot going on in the world. Right now there is a continuing assault by Republicans to try to harm the liberties and freedoms of trans people, and the most notable attack is in Texas, where you have a governor who is surreptitiously going around the law to basically frame gender-affirming care that is necessary for trans children, as child abuse, which is rich considering the fact that conservatives, by their nature, don't give a crap about child abuse.
Yep.
QAnon is nothing more than old Nazi memes. They're the same party that continually votes for child marriage, continually stops early sex ed, which would stop abuse, or at least hinder it significantly.
Well, and give people the tools to actually
talk about it.
And
remember, fascists want to take away language. It's anti-intellectualism and newspeak.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we got our Echo. We'll talk about Frankel in a minute. So, rather than kind of get on their asses, as angry as I am, and as angry as I know Zena is, what we'd rather like to do today is talk about what to do in these situations. Because beyond those attacks and all the stuff happening in Ukraine and everything that is in the world, rather than go over that stuff again and again and again, I think it's better to kind of offer you some tools and explain why those tools may be useful to you in dealing with this stuff. Because there's a lot of us who, you know, maybe we're really good at taking those breaks, maybe we're really good at stepping away. But if my time in the online left has taught me anything, we're really fucking bad at it. The always online left has a really hard time stepping away from this shit. We're constantly online, doom scrolling, constantly going through and trying to understand the way a thing works, because we feel it is our requirements as leftists to know as much about a situation as possible. And this is further exacerbated by people like tankies, you know, and other fake leftists, or theory heads who sit there and whine that we need to know as much theory as possible, or we have to know every nuance of a situation before we can sound off on it. Between trying to understand Ukrainian culture, the interactions over the last 30 years between the Ukraine and Russia, the long-standing use of gender-affirming care and all the ways that came about, WPAT, like, do you guys see how this gets overwhelming really fucking quickly? It is not your job to know everything. Your takes, while ideally should be very informed, should not necessarily be something that you beat yourself up over if you can't know everything about it. So, what I wanted to look at is a little brief article. It's a fun one from Psych Today, and kind of have me and Zena jump in as well. So, follow me on this little journey. Self-love in difficult times. Caring for yourself can make the world a better place. So, this person talks about their difficulties with depression, anxiety, difficulties with illness and the like. Here's some of the things they suggest. So if you don't watch the rest of this video, I just want to offer these things to you quick, and then we'll do descriptions of them and all that. So if you don't watch anything else about this video, here's the things we suggest. Keeping a daily journal. Now, you could do that as a bullet journal, where you're actually doing proper journaling, and you're writing down what your thoughts are and what your feelings are about these situations or things and how they interact with your life. You can also spend the time writing specifically about the feelings of powerlessness at some of these things. I think that's something we don't let ourselves feel very often, because feeling vulnerable and scared is an anathema to being a tough leftist. But in reality, there is nothing I can do about the Ukraine. I can donate money to support that cause. I can try to be there and push back online, but in reality, there's not a lot I can do. Right now, if I think about it too hard, there are people suffering right now, and there's nothing I can do. That is incredibly painful. So one of the things we've talked about in this channel, and Zena can give you a very brief overview, is we talked about the bullet journal and how that works. And that probably can lead into some of these other things, is using the bullet journal as a way to keep track of these things as well.
Yeah.
Do you remember which bullet journals videos we've done? I think we've done 3. There was the first one.
Well, what do you mean? Which ones? What are you looking for?
Well, I want people to be able to know those videos exist and also what's roughly in them. Because there's the first one where you introduce it and show the system. There's the second one where we did. There's another one where we did habits.
Habits was the third one, I think. Because
Yeah.
I'd done a second. We should have a playlist. If we don't have a playlist, we should.
I believe we do. I just don't think I've put them in there yet.
So bullet journaling is a system that not only encompasses journaling, but also is a way to organize and keep track of like your calendar and tasks and all of that in the same place. So it's a really helpful for like a central location. And when you're dealing with current events like this or things happening on a timeline, it can be helpful to note where those events are happening in time with relationship to other things that are going on with you, right? So if you've got like maybe a whole lot of appointments and then like a lot of stress from like, seeing all this news coverage and all of that, and you're feeling really stressed, there might be a clue there in this to go, hey, maybe somewhere I need to slow down. And a bullet journal can be really helpful in helping you realize that, because you're suddenly able to put together all the things that are going on with you in one place. All right. So we've got a couple of videos how to get one started.
There's 3 total. The third one we couldn't remember was the one using the bullet journal for personal introspection.
Yes, personal introspection. And then I think there's a second one where we kind of go back into like practically using it for realsies as well. Yeah. Because any journaling system.
I think that was part of the personal introspection one, because I think we combined them. Yeah.
No, I think you're right.
So those 3 videos are there. I'll make sure the playlist is updated, but we want to make sure you have these things. Zena did a lot of really good work on researching for the bullet journal stuff. And again, this person actually makes a good point. A daily journal helps you gain some distance from your thought patterns and observe the way that they affect you. You may also discover how things like your sleep pattern and biorhythms affect your mood. This can make it easier to find constructive ways to deal with your thoughts and feelings. You might also try doing a page or 2 of positivity or gratitude exercises. Now, I know everyone kind of sighs at the idea of like gratitude exercises or affirmations, but they do have a use. So I do highly recommend them if there's something that you feel comfortable with. But what she's talking about here that I think is really useful, it's she, I believe. No, he. What he is talking about here is that one of the things that I think is really useful about journaling is the ability to make sure that you're keeping track of things like chronic illness or how often you're doing a certain thing. So those who are interested in meditating, we'll be talking about Zen later tonight. We'll talk about some mindfulness here too. You can keep track of your meditation in your bullet journal. If you are dealing with migraines like we do, you can keep track of your migraines, so the next time you go to your neurologist, you can go through and show them what the frequency is instead of making a rough guesstimate that might actually be off. Things like that could be really useful. To-do lists, so that you bite-size and chunk information. We've talked about this before, but when you chunk information into different bite-size levels, it makes it a lot easier to process. So instead of being overwhelmed by everything in your life, having a to-do list and having that something to be crossed off can be really, really beneficial. So just things to consider.
Yeah, well, and I like bullet journaling because it does identifiably show you that your time is limited. You only have so much energy, right? And so when you actually have to look at the list and actually go, okay, wait a minute, what actually needs to be done, what doesn't, that can be really powerful. And especially in these kind of times, sifting out maybe the things that are not as crucial right now, letting stuff go for later so you can deal with the stuff going on right now might need to be a thing.
Yep. So next they have getting enough exercise. So I want to be really clear. I am advocating exercise. The thing is that what me and Zena are very clear about when we talk about advocating exercise is that we are not saying this to meet some sort of beauty standard. We're not saying this out of a sense of like fat phobia. We're not saying this because we're trying to reify gender roles. We want to make that very clear. The thing is that there is tremendous evidence showing that aerobic exercise can be very helpful with dealing with things like depression, like this person says here. The nice thing about COVID is that there's a lot of opportunity if you are home a lot to be able to, just find a video online that you can kind of work along with. One of the ones I really like is Yoga with Adriene. That's a really good one.
That's one of my favorites too.
You also can look up certain weight exercises and try to get an idea what the form is. Just pick yourself up some little hand weights, but just something to go through and take care of your body, because again, it's not about necessarily strength training or building or losing weight or anything like that. How you have your body is your choice. The thing is that these things are very important in taking care of yourself, right? So that's the thing.
I will add as well, like, if you are dealing with various disabilities, look up various things to work with those disabilities. I know there's like chair yoga, is a thing. If you are, say, not really able to get hand weights, you could also use things like a can of soup. That would totally work. So there are things that you can do to kind of figure out what you're able to do and be able to work with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing on this list is mindfulness meditation. When practice regularly helps you reduce chronic stress, regulate afflictive emotions, and reconnect with your intuition as a way to calmly work through your problems, or working through problems. Mindfulness practice helps you see your life in a new light. What previously seemed impossible becomes manageable, and what felt hopeless becomes merely difficult. So I want to differentiate two terms here because they get used interchangeably. Mindfulness and meditation are referring to similar but different things, right? So meditation refers to exclusively, and when I use it, I'm referring to specifically the practice of either open monitoring or focused attention practice. These are practices specifically for the intention of either gaining certain benefits such as insight and clarity, or for some sort of spiritual benefit, but these are practices. I use these in a very specific way because of my Zen background. Meditation in the West, as I've said in our Zen video, is a very twisted thing because the problem is it focuses exclusively on either meditation in the contemplative sense or meditation in a much more vague sense, which can cover everything from relaxation practices, which, by the way, are useful. Relaxation practices are great, but it does conflate them with meditation practice in the form of what I'm talking about. So what I would say is that there's a couple things to think here. If you're looking to bring mindfulness into your life, what I would highly suggest is it would be really beneficial if you went through and took up a meditation practice. I highly recommend this. Now, my recommendation for this is that what you should do is I'd like you to just sit 5 minutes. Sit 5 minutes a day. Do not move. I'm not asking for an hour. I'm not asking for a half an hour. 5 minutes. And 5 minutes, you sit back straight. If you need to use a chair, use a chair. If you need a cushion, you need a cushion. Whatever will make you comfortably be able to sit still for 5 minutes. You, with your eyes open, you look for a spot about 6 to 8 feet in front of you. You let your eyes go soft. You make sure your neck is straight. And what you're doing, on the in-breath, listen deeper than your thoughts and feelings. Through your senses and through your mind, pay attention to your body, pay attention to what's happening inside you and outside of you. On the out-breath, say to yourself silently, listen. Every time you say this, go deeper and deeper. Now what's going to happen is you're going to get off track. You're going to think about random stuff. And what's going to inevitably happen is you're going to be pulled into some thought or some concept or stream or whatever. That's not a problem. The purpose is that when you notice this happen, come back to the practice, come back to the listening. Real meditation practice is about learning to sit with discomfort as well as learning how to notice when your mind has got off track and coming back. That coming back is not a failure. It's actually important. All right? Now, where you can take this into full mindfulness is, instead of listening to something when you're cooking or listening to something when you're, doing dishes or any of the normal things you do to distract yourself from the tasks you're doing, one thing I would highly recommend is don't do those. Just do the tasks. And when I say just do the task, it's not I'm doing dishes and thinking about the next time I play, you know, whatever popular game is out. What I'm saying is you do the chore and just do the chore. Your mind is exclusively focused on that thing. If you're doing the dishes, just do the dishes. That type of practice can be incredibly powerful because it takes you out of the internal stories and move directly into being present with what's actually happening with you in the moment. All right? So next, seeing a therapist. Now, this probably seems like I'm, you know, we're being a bit, you know, what's the term? Self-flating? I don't know.
Well, especially because none of you can really, like, see Jess, so.
Yeah, so.
A therapist, though.
So here's the thing. We talked about before in our previous videos about how to find a self-aggrandizing. Thank you.
Yeah.
We've talked about in our previous videos how to find therapists. I highly recommend this right now with everything going on. I think it's important to set up multiple appointments with multiple therapists if you have the money or you have the insurance that'll allow for it. And I think you should go in with the questions we've given you through the video about how to find a therapist. And what I think would be really beneficial is to, you know, it's not about them checking you in. It's about you interrogating and interviewing them. Ask them and tell them, you know, what is it you're looking for? If this person's values don't match with yours, don't stay. The way we get shitty therapists out of you know, clinical work is by them not having clients. And so someone who is a avid Trump supporter or who is actively harmful to those around them, yeah, you don't want that person as your therapist because it's hard to imagine that person can't let some of the stuff in there.
Well, you also just are looking for somebody that's got the right expertise to match up with what your needs are, right?
Yeah.
You know,
So
that's kind of the other one.
Yeah, so finding someone, and again, we have videos about this too. Find a therapist for what you're working on.
Yep.
If you feel traumatized and harmed by all of this bad news, then find someone who does trauma work. If you're looking to do work to be able to improve your social skills, especially those who are neurodivergent, guess what? Look into a Gestalt therapy group. Look into groups where you actually have to face that stuff directly, right? So I think this is really important to do is if you're able to. If you're not able to, the thing I would always ask you to do is remember to ask if they have a sliding scale.
Yep.
And ask if there is a way that they would let you work through like payments or whatnot. Something that would allow you to be able to be there, right? If you really like this therapist, you can sometimes fight for that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are still needing to call around a lot, please check into any local organizations that might be able to help you find one. A lot of LGBT organizations, you know, if you call them up, might know some people in the area that take clients. There are a lot of other systems that you might be able to look up locally to find something that will work for you. So please just keep in mind that those resources are there. You might just need to hunt around a little bit.
Yeah. So these two kind of ones fit together, in my opinion. Getting in touch with your interests, you know, good way to combat stress. So if you're into video games, if you're into instruments, the one thing I will say on video games, and I'm going to get shit for this from the other gamers, is that watch it. Gaming does, in some cases, lead to addictive tendencies. This is not because gaming inherently does this, but because it is an enjoyable interactive task, it does spike dopamine. There is actually things such as, you know, discussions of having a DSM variation of gaming addiction because of those people who will play WoW for 18 hours a day and stuff like that. Like, this is not to say that your gaming is bad, it's to say that you should do so mindfully.
Yes.
Play a game for a bit and then step away. For those of you who are playing Elden Ring, a game I will never play, go fuck yourselves. The fact is, take breaks. That game is made to be frustrating. Souls games always are. It's why I don't play them. So my suggestion is that you take steps away. If that being that frustrated and pushing through the hard, difficult thing to eventually have, you know, some form of success is actually therapeutically beneficial for you, do it. But be mindful about how you're engaging with that media. And this goes for other crafts too, like doing crafts work. Zena, of course, doing knitting and crochet.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, making sure that I'm not accidentally hurting my hands too much during knitting is a thing. I think with games, being careful of the game loop would be another thing to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of having enough wherewithal to be like, okay, is this whole game loop the thing that I'm sucked into? Is this meeting me right now, or is this just distracting me? Because sometimes it can be really helpful, but like you said, other times that's not actually getting you to a calmer place.
The other caveat I'll say, and then we'll move on, is just if you're neurodiverse, I would really look at some of the accessibility videos by Laura K. Buzz talking about how there are things in games that are predatorily set up to get to mess with certain people, and that especially is true with neurodiverse people. Mm-hmm. So if you're someone who has ADHD and you want to go, the tendency to try to push for you to take a microtransaction, things like that. Or if you're someone like Laura Kay, who I remember in one episode of Podquisition, she mentioned being autistic. There was something about her playing the game No Man's Sky when it first came out that kept her locked into the gameplay loop for hours. She had to actually step away from the game entirely because it was causing problems. And Admiral Paco's right. A question I ask about some games is, am I enjoying this or am I in a Skinner box? Absolutely.
Yep.
So enjoy your interest. Craft stuff, that kind of stuff, really good. Mm-hmm. Leaning into your uniqueness sounds silly, but let's see what they have to say. Is another way to love yourself and care for yourself. We all have unique facets of our identity that may have been a struggle in the past. Whether it has to do with gender or sexuality, socioeconomic status, race or ethnicity, the experience of being different may have left behind feelings of being less valued or appreciated. As we learn to love those parts of ourselves that do not fit into the mainstream, we simultaneously help ourselves and lift up our communities. I agree. So one thing I would say about this too is there is a difference between leaning into your identities and connecting with communities that are part of those identities and engaging in online leftist politics. That overlap, especially for our Discord and other Discords, is huge, right? There's a ton of trans people in our Discord. There's a ton of trans people in Demon Mama's Discord and Volsh's Discord, etc. What this, I think, is really important is leaning into that stuff on a group level. That's really helpful. But additionally, and I think this is the really important thing, is I think it's very important for marginalized people to take the time to go through and look internally and look at those identities and see where they have issues. Now, what I mean by that is not to say that those groups are hurt or damaged inherently, but what I'm saying is that if you're a person that grew up in a very racist area and have dealt with systemic racism, you have the possibility of either fighting against those things or you may have internalized some of that messaging. See if there's ways that you have done that. Internalized transphobia. We've talked about internal transphobia, right? There's a way in which we will take our own dysphoria and our own way of feeling and can sometimes hurt or damage other people. I literally just saw a post on a subreddit talking about how there was a non-passing trans one really upset because people would say, oh, you just make me dysphoric. Like, why the fuck would you tell someone that? Right? So just take the time to really connect with those things. And if that means digging into trans stuff, if you're someone who's into kink, go play with your playmates. Like, find a way to get away from this stuff because taking breaks from this is really important and those connections are going to be meaningful. This also goes into the therapist thing is, again, if you do find stuff about this that you've either internalized or you have trauma around, it's really important to work through those things because we can strive to end marginalization. We can strive to make things more equitable and not necessarily carry our traumas forward with that. I would argue that one of the major factors of the whole canceling phenomenon is due to the fact that people will vomit their trauma onto situations due to a number of things such as parasocial relationships and projection. This person becomes the bad thing, but because they've been marginalized, the opportunity to have power and lash out is almost intoxicating. I had this argument as well earlier, is that we have to watch for this stuff. Like, the tendency to want power is inherently part of being human. It seems to be something that's part of us. We need to examine that more. Maybe that's a future segment, but I think it's important to be honest with ourselves about when that stuff's coming up, because when we are honest about it and honest with other people about it, I think it makes us less likely to try to strive out to do that stuff.
Well,
right?
And it gives, I think, more opportunity to bring something that would be taboo to talk about or something, in the darkness, to bring that into the light, right? To actually figure out ways to deal with that constructively.
Watch your self-talk. This one's huge.
Yeah.
Watch your self-talk. This is a form of mindfulness, by the way. Catching this shit is hard. I call people out in this community. I've called people out on this when they say things like this. I will say mean things to people in our community sometimes as a joke. The minute it appears that anything's been harmed and they don't understand that there's a joke, I immediately switch gears and switch tone. Why? Because there's a difference between playfully batting at your friends, like two cubs, playing together next to their mom, versus hurting someone. And the problem is sometimes we're talking to ourselves and we either don't realize it or we're actively being shaming. And we've talked about this in the shame versus guilt video where I called Vosh out. Me and Zena were very clear about why that was a problem.
Yeah, journaling can also really help with this as well. And a lot of the distorted thinking series, if self-talk is something you're struggling with, definitely check out the distorted thinking playlist on our channel.
Yeah, so this person says, can also help improve your relationships with yourself. Be on the lookout for self-blaming, negative talk about yourself and your own internal dialogues. These can be thoughts like, it's all my fault, I will never be good enough, and other kinds of things we say to ourselves. Try speaking positively to yourselves instead, saying things like, I love you, you've got this, and everything is going to be okay. The way of speaking to yourself overwrites negative habits with healthier ones so that you feel loved and supported from the inside out. Maybe one thing I'll put on the server one of these days is the schema inventory I have, which is you go through, you fill out this inventory, and then when you score it, what it tells you is where you may have certain schemas. Now, we talked about schemas before. They're internal rules about certain things, how the world is, how things are, and most notably, self-schemas are about ourselves.
Go ahead, I've got one when you're done.
What's nice about this is I've taken a few clients through this, and this inventory is incredibly powerful because it starts to put together all the pieces of why your negative self-talk is the way it is. If you're a person who is skeptical at a schema level, that is not just you have a negative thought occasionally, this is built into how you conceptualize your sense of self, you realize that this is actually a narrative that you're letting yourself live in that's either been put on you by yourself, that is through shame, and misunderstood messaging, or interjected, that is you've internalized it based on the messaging of those around you or society as a whole. Self-talk is crucial. I, for the longest time, would be very hesitant to ever engaging any kind of self-deprecating humor or things like that because I'd get very triggered. I can do it now because I've done the work on it to not get as triggered. So Zena or other people will hear me say, I was being a fucking idiot. It's not because I think I'm unintelligent. I think I'm very intelligent. But the fact is that I don't have the same charge around that I did. And I had to look at not just the negative self-talk, but the talk that sometimes if it happened would cause real harm. Not just with myself, but with other people too. So just something to look at. You had something?
Yeah. One of the ways that I try and change stuff is instead of going, I just fucked everything up, or I just messed all of this up, especially like after a panic attack or a flashback, because sometimes that could be a really large chunk of time, all things said and done at the end of the day. Instead of apologizing for all of those reactions, I like to thank, people or whoever was helping me instead. So like going like, hey Jess, I really appreciate you, going through all that, or just hanging in there with me through all of that. Mm-hmm. And going through the act of thanking somebody, I find really, really helps. They feel very appreciated and know that like they understand now the effect that they're having on you, which is really helpful, right? You want them to know that they're having a good effect even during the really difficult times.
How often do you thank your partner for fighting with you? Just saying. Like, that's what Zena's talking about, where you're engaging with each other and being really, really pissy, and you have to make it through that together and come out the other side okay. That's the going through it we're talking about. Like, sometimes that is a trial, and sometimes that person unknowingly, even if you're fighting with them, is going through it with you. So yeah, that's something we found to be very helpful, is acknowledging that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we end this segment, I want to bring up somebody who I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So let me bring him up. For those who don't know, there was a book that I read when I was younger called A Man's Search for Meaning. It was by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a neurologist, psychiatrist, philosopher, and a Holocaust survivor. He was the creator of logos therapy, a school of psychotherapy that describes a search for life's meaning as the central human motivation. It is a combination of existential therapy and humanistic psychology, right? So, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about his time in the Nazi concentration camps. The reason I'm bringing Frankl up is not to suddenly get very dark or whatnot. What I want to be really clear with is that these things are important to realize, that you're not the only human being that's lived through them, and people have survived this. In fact, one of the things that's really beautiful about his life is that he took his time in the concentration camps and used that as a means by which to make meaning in the world. And we'll look at a couple quotes from him, but this is some of the background. After earning his MD in 1930, Frankl gained extensive experience at the Seinhof Psychiatric Hospital, where he was responsible for the treatment of suicidal women. In 1937, he began a private practice, but the Nazi annexation of Austria in 1938 limited his opportunities to treat patients. In 1940, he joined Rothschild Hospital, the only hospital in Vienna still admitting Jews, as the head of the neurology department. Prior to his deportation to the concentration camps, he'd helped numerous patients avoid Nazi euthanasia programs that targeted the mentally disabled.
Holy crap.
In 1942, just 9 months after his marriage, Frankl and his family were sent to the, I'm not going to be able to pronounce that, Theresienstadt? Fuck off, German. Concentration camp. His father died there of starvation and pneumonia. In 1944, Frankl and the surviving members of his family were transported to Auschwitz, where his mother and brother were gassed. His wife died later of typhus in Bergen-Belsen. Frankl spent 3 years in 4 concentration camps. So, this man didn't die until 1997. Right? So let's look at a couple quotes from him, because I think when I talk to you about the meaning-making process of the human mind, this guy got it. And there's something really important about that process, because right now it is very easy, with all of the things that we get to distract ourselves in our life with, to get lost in this idea that everything's too much, it's too much, it's too much. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's also, what meaning are you making? What narrative are you engaging in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at what he had to say. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Right? So fundamentally, no matter how you are incarcerated, no matter how you are imprisoned in some way, shape, or form, there's always still some level of choice. This is fundamental. And while, yes, neurology does show that that choice is sometimes made at a very clear, sort of pre-conscious level, that doesn't take away from the consciousness, because the conscious still had to go through that process to then match up with the pre-conscious. This does not in any way negate free will. When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Think about that. We can't do anything about the Ukraine. We can donate, we can try to speak out, we can call out fake leftists who say that, the Ukraine, I guess, had it coming or something, because that old line never gets old for these people. We can call out Republicans, we can fight against these trans bills, but at some level, when we exhaust our options, we need to, at some level, try to figure out what this means for us, right? Let's see. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Think about the weight of that for somebody who's lost so many in a concentration camp, 4 concentration camps. Do you understand that? The idea is that by making meaning in a certain way, by controlling the way you make meaning, you can live through almost anything. If you look into the schools of thought of, say, resilience and grit, there appears to be people who be able to do this, and there's something there, especially if you look at not post-traumatic stress disorder, but post-traumatic growth. There is a function of some humans that when they go through trauma, instead of their ego being damaged or crumpling, and again, that's not an insult, that's not any kind of value judgment, but that's kind of the internal experience as someone who has PTSD, what that's like. Post-traumatic growth is the opposite, where a person is built up and develops from their trauma. That's not to say the trauma was good. The trauma is still horrific. But what happens is the way they make a meaning out of it. And this is from positive psych. This is not just me making shit up. This was literally about this. This is human beings are tremendous in our storytelling and meaning making capabilities. So beyond the practices we gave you at the beginning, I need you to understand what you're feeling right now about these situations is valid. Right? He goes on to say, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. True. Ultimately, man should not ask what the meaning of life is, but rather must recognize that it is he who is asked. In a word, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. Real quick, I want to find another quote and then we'll call it good.
Mm-hmm.
This one's important. Let's see. This is another father of existential therapy. What do we got? It's Yalom quotes. We're not doing Love's Executioner, though it is still my favorite and based. But this one I think is really important. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Trying to find the one I want. Not finding the one I want, which is unfortunate. If I don't find it in this page, I will just try to remember it from memory.
Try Googling it.
The problem is I don't remember any specific keywords.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can find it. I can try to... because I think this will capstone things well. So I can't find it right now, but essentially Yalom's argument was that one of the absurdities of human life is that we spend our entire life looking for meaning out there, only to realize at some level that the meaning making is actually in us. We are the ones that make meaning, only to convince ourselves once again that it is out there. Because the existential fear, the existential difficulty of realizing that we're in control, that we're the ones actually telling the story, is too much. So we pawn it off on God or fate or the universe. You are the one that has the control to make meaning out of this. These times are horrific. Take time with yourselves, take care, and ask yourself what meaning you are making. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. And we'll see you in the next one.
Mm-hmm.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.